Forget the poetry. Forget the noble heroes of Homer, the shining armor, and the meddling gods of Olympus. The late Bronze Age was a meat grinder, endlessly aggressive geopolitical machine. They built their initial power base through pure extortion and violent takeover. By the 15th century BC, they had crossed the Aegean and absorbed the Minoans of Crete, draining the island's resources and completely subjugating the wealthiest society the Mediterranean had ever seen. Conquering Crete didn't just provide a one-time windfall. It established a palace system that relied on the constant intake of foreign tribute and slaves to function. The Mycenaean administration was now built on the assumption of growth, meaning any pause in expansion threatened the economic stability of the mainland lords. Moving east into Anatolia, the Greek war machine hit a brick wall. The Hittite Empire controlled the highlands, a massive, highly organized superpower that regularly traded blows with Egypt and Babylon. Caught squarely between these two ancient titans was an independent coastal kingdom the Hittites called Walusa. History and legend remember it as Troy. The city sat on the Dardanelles, connecting the Aegean and Black Seas. Every shipment of copper and tin passed through this choke point. Choking off that lane starved enemies of raw materials. Whoever held Walusa held the carotid artery of the ancient economy. Controlling those walls meant controlling the regional balance of power. Walusa was the geopolitical fuse destined to ignite a Bronze Age world war. The myth insists the war started when a Trojan prince abducted Helen of Sparta. In reality, the Greeks launched a deliberate campaign of state-sponsored terrorism designed to fracture Hittite authority on the coast. The Greeks found their wedge in a rebel warlord named Piama Radu. Backed by Mycenaean weapons and operating out of a Greek stronghold on the coastline, he launched a decades-long insurgency, violently deposing local kings and raiding Hittite vassals. We know his name because the Hittite scribes logged every single raid. These cuneiform tablets record desperate messages from local governors begging the Hittite king for troops. Eventually, King Mu'atali marched west, forcing the Trojan king into a strict military vassal agreement called the Alexandru Treaty. The treaty drew a hard line in the sand. Troy was now a heavily fortified outpost of the Hittite Empire, staring directly down the spear points of the expanding Greek military. Back across the Aegean, the Greek warlords knew exactly what kind of enemy they had provoked. The constant aggression abroad bred an intense, suffocating paranoia at home. They responded by fortifying their own palaces to an extreme degree. At Mycenae and Tiryns, they dragged multi-ton boulders to construct cyclopean walls and carved secret emergency water tunnels deep into the solid bedrock. Preparations solely designed to survive a massive, prolonged siege. Meanwhile, looking at the archaeological layer known as Troy 7a, the Trojans were doing the exact same thing. They contracted their city limits, rapidly thickened their walls, reinforced the main south gate, and packed their houses tightly together for protection. The entire eastern Mediterranean was locked in a cycle of mobilization. Both sides were now funneling their agricultural surplus into the maintenance of garrisons, while labor was diverted from the fields to the quarries. When you pull a bowstring back this far, the eventual release is going to tear the bow apart. This level of militarization ensured that when the tension finally snapped, the resulting war would be an event of total destruction. Around 1180 BC, the tension finally broke. The Greek forces breached the walls of Troy, sacked the citadel, and set the city ablaze. The greatest choke point in the ancient world was wiped entirely off the map. The Greek war machine achieved its objective, but the victory came at a staggering material cost. Decades of preparation and a massive, years-long overseas campaign had hollowed out the mainland's labor force and exhausted the royal treasuries. Almost immediately after Troy fell, the Greek palaces themselves came under attack. Cities like Pylos and Mycenae were sacked and burned. Scribes at these centers desperately carved their final, panicked defensive orders into wet clay right as their walls collapsed. Those records only survived because the fire that destroyed the palaces baked the clay solid. Into this massive power vacuum poured the Sea Peoples, a coalition of raiders and displaced refugees, likely generated by this exact conflict, who swept through the Mediterranean, wiping out the weakened remnants of the old powers. The decade-long focus on a single city across the sea left the Greek mainland vulnerable. By the time the fires in Troy died down, the victors returned to find their own system already beginning to fracture under the weight of the effort. The Bronze Age world was burning to the ground.